Hello, Year 11, Mr. Musa here with the poem The Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Remember that this is part of English Literature Paper 2 for the Power and Conflict Poetry section. So let's start by just going over very quickly a few little bits about context. So this poem is about a battle known as the Battle of Balaclava. It was part of a war, the Crimean War, and it was Britain versus Russia. Now, Alfred Lord Tennyson, his job, his role was the poet laureate. What that meant was that he worked for the government effectively, and his job was to write poems about important historical events that were affecting the country. So you've got to think carefully about the fact that because he was directly working with the government, he couldn't always be 100% clear in his viewpoints. So if we think about his perspective a little bit, if he wanted to criticize the government, for example, he might not be able to do that as clearly or as explicitly as he wants to. During this battle, hundreds of British soldiers died. So hundreds of British soldiers died, and it was the result of miscommunication. So I'm just going to write miscommunication. So there was a mistake made, and the wrong instructions were given, and hundreds of soldiers died. If I just give you a very quick diagram to represent this. So how I want you to think about it is, say that we've got the battleground here. This is where the battle's going to be taking place. The leaders of the British were here, so quite far away. They would send a messenger to the British Army. So let's say the British were waiting here for their instructions. So the British soldiers are waiting here. So they're waiting now for their instructions. So from a very long distance away, a messenger has got to come and bring the instructions over. So lots of things could go wrong. So it was quite easy for there to be an error in understanding what was happening. Now, what was meant to happen was that the British soldiers were meant to kind of split themselves almost in two. Some of them were meant to go around this way. Some of them were meant to go around this way because the Russians were all here. So what they would have been able to do is surround the Russians from both sides. But this messenger, there was some kind of a blunder, some kind of a mistake. So what the British soldiers ended up doing was they actually ended up going this way. And actually, the Russians had them surrounded then. And so the Russians were able to just shoot at them from both sides. And so hundreds of British soldiers died. Now, to make it a little bit more complicated, just about as they were about to get here, the British soldiers realized that a mistake had been made. But because of the traditions around soldiers being honorable and obedient, they weren't allowed to question their commands, and they would have seen that as being a really disrespectful thing to do. So they went into battle knowing that they'd been given the wrong instructions and knowing that they were in a very dangerous predicament or problem. Right, let's get stuck into the poem. So this poem is known as The Charge of the Light Brigade. So first thing, the Light Brigade is the name of the group, the squadron in the British Army that were affected. So name of the battalion, sometimes known as a squadron. If we think about the word light, it means that they're not heavily armed. That's because their job was to be like a scouting group. So they wouldn't have huge guns on them that would weigh them down. They'd be quite light. So they'd be on horse. They'd go ahead. They'd go and check out what was going on. Then they'd come and report back. So actually, they weren't also prepared for war as well. And then we've got the word charge. Well, if we think about charge. It's a movement, right? So it's showing kind of momentum and force, like they were moving forward. Right, I'll read the poem to you. It's a slightly longer poem than usual, but it's got a real rhythm to it, and I hope you pick that out from my reading. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the light brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the light brigade, was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered. Stormed out with shot and shell, boldly they rode and well. Into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell, rode the 600. Flashed all their sabres bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabring the gunners there, charging an army while all the world wondered, plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke, Cossack and Russian reeled from the sabre stroke, shattered and sundered. Then they rode back, but not the 600. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon behind them, volleyed and thundered. Stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. All that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, all the world wondered. Honour the charge they made, honour the light brigade, noble 600. So let's get cracking then. We'll pick out about 3 or 4 quotations that are the important ones for us to know. So, first thing, it describes the location as the Valley of Death. So it suggests that the soldiers knew that the order that was given was going to see them killed. That reference to the Valley of Death as well is from the Bible, so it is a biblical reference. So it suggests that the soldiers knew that death was inescapable. So the soldiers knew that death was inescapable at this point. Then it tells us about the fact that someone had blundered. So a mistake had been made. We've got that word blundered there with that really harsh, plosive burst sound, right? So a plosive burst sound just means that when you say it, you push out a lot of air. Blundered. So that suggests that Tennyson is angry. He's not being over the top. He's not being explicit about his anger, but he's angry about the fact that all these soldiers died because somebody had made a mistake. This bit here, we've got lots of repetition, or also known as anaphora here. There's not to make reply. There's not to reason why. There's but to do and die. So it's this idea that for these soldiers, it's not their job to question the command that they're given. It's not their job to try and understand the command that they've been given. They just do as they are told. And we've got this rhyme here as well: reply, why, die. It's quite final, quite certain. It's definite. Their death is definite. Their death is certain. Right, let's pick out the next bit. Got more repetition, more anaphora here. Cannon, cannon, cannon. It's just showing that they are surrounded. That war and fury and warfare is all around them. They cannot escape. Again, we've got that harsh k sound there. Remember, poetry is all about sounds. So that harsh k sound there, showing how war is cruel and callous. So far we've got the quote, in the valley of death, to show that the soldiers knew that they were about to die. We've got someone had blundered to represent that a mistake had been made, and then cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them. I'm going to pick out two more quotes. I think Into the Mouth of Hell is a really, really lovely quote, and it's quite easy to remember. So we've got a religious reference there, religious language. We've got personification, making this battle sound like it's some kind of monster with a mouth that's coming to devour it, making it sound like hell is alive and personified there. It's this idea that they're being devoured by war. A really beautiful image there. Well, a terrifying image, actually. I'm going to pick out one last thing. I'm going to actually skip the next two stanzas. I'm just going to go right to the end now to tell, so we can see what Tennyson's message is. Tennyson's message at the end is to honour the Light Brigade, honour the charge they made. So we've got these commands here. So at the end, he says, well, do you know what? Rather than thinking about all these mistakes and rather than thinking about who's to blame for what happened, let's think about the fact that we need to remember the sacrifices made by the soldiers. And that's the main message of the poem. So if we think about what this poem is about, it's about the effects of conflict. It's about how power can be abused. It's about actually how sometimes we don't have power. If we're at the bottom of the hierarchy, we can very much be lacking in power as well. We've talked about repetition, but some other structural things in this poem. There is a real rhythm, half a league, half a league, half a league onward. So it suggests that with that rhythm, I'm just going to do this in red here. So there is a rhythm all throughout the poem that the soldiers were moving forwards. The soldiers were always moving forwards bravely. So they weren't worried, they weren't scared, they did what they were meant to do, they did their job, and that rhythm, half a league, half a league, half a league onward, really reinforces that.